Let's now talk about geopolitically and geoeconomically. How does Vladimir Putin's visit to India reflect on India's efforts to stitch up those all-important free trade agreements with other regions, including the European Union, given the fact that there is pressure from US and EU on Russia to end the war in Ukraine? Rakesh Khar, let's understand first from you exactly how precariously is Russian President Vladimir Putin placed right now, given the fact that he doesn't have support of the European Union even one bit, and President Donald Trump continues to sort of swing both ways between first being friends with Putin, then being friends with Zelensky, and then back to Putin, and then back to Zelensky. We've seen that sort of pendulum swing. But given the fact that EU is very, very clear that Russia should not be given any land and Russia should not be given access to any territory which is the sovereign right of Ukraine, the fact that Russia trying to make a statement with Vladimir Putin here in India and saying that, hey, I'm not isolated in the world, I've still got my friends. What does this mean for India's FTAs, which are under negotiation and discussion with the European Union? Could this rub India the wrong way?
I don't think so. The world has come to acknowledge the reality of these, multipolar situations. India is talking to EU, EU is talking to India. It just signed up a UK FTA. So I don't think the one will run against each other. The key issue is that, these parallel conversations will continue while India wants to ramp up its own economic ties with Russia. There's a huge deficit in terms of the balance of trade there, which, Putin yesterday in his interview outlined. We need to find solutions to so to say bridge that deficit. And I guess on the table, India really has not been able to last 70 years think out of box in terms of bridging that. We see them as essential suppliers of defense ties, while President Putin said we don't just supply, we share, which is a fact, which is where we stand different from US in terms of defense deals. Most importantly, I think on the table would be building larger import-export balance between India and Russia, while as we have parallel conversations. To answer your question, I don't think they would be disturbed beyond a point. There would be optics, as I said, the EU ambassadors have written and used Indian media to make a point, but there is a limitation to optics and then ground realities of working with independent entities. Putin, of course, made light of G7. He said, what is this G in this great? What is great? India is the fastest growing economy. Germany is losing. He didn't mention many more countries, but he did say that the order has changed. And he mentioned China. And of course, you're right. Now, G7 versus G2, India doesn't fit in there.
Yep.
So these conversations will pan out. We really don't know how they're going to shape up. But India is on top of the table in terms of leading these parallel conversations without slighting one against the other.
All right. So, Kartik, just to add to what Rakesh is saying, let's look at it from an EU perspective, right? EU has two issues. One is the issue of strategic security. It feels threatened by Russia.
Right.
But on the economic front, obviously, EU also realizes that it's like greatest economies in European Union.
Right.
They are facing a slowdown. There's an aging population. So there is a need for EU, especially in the context of US, changing its dynamics with EU as a country. It's no longer the post-World War status quo. The way Trump is disengaging from EU in some sense, it implies that EU needs newer partnerships. It needs newer economic partnerships. And what better than one of the fastest growing economies in the world, which is India. So I think these are two different buckets, and India also will engage with EU on those terms. There is a need for a closer economic ties. Whereas, EU needs to fight its own issues with Russia. I don't think that's something India can solve for them. So I think India, as far as the EU FTA is concerned, will focus on merit, on terms of trade, what works for India and what works for European nations.